All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome. I am Keith Adkins. I am one of our professors of education here at Vincennes University, and I'm going to be your moderator for this panel today. I'm going to do a couple of introductions, but one piece of organization. Throughout the panel, we're going to respect his time, but if you have questions, we will have time at the end for Q&A. If you do have a question, we've got these two rows right by the microphones that you should be able to see on either side. Just go and grab a seat over there until you have the opportunity to ask your question, and then you can filter back to your seats there at the end. Today we have Trent Andrews with us. He is the operations director of the Candles Museum in Terre Haute. He has over a decade of experience in Holocaust education. We are very grateful to have him with us today. This is, of course, all brought to you by our Shake Library. So Charla Gilbert is our bigwig here, her and her team. She's the director of library services here at VU and for the Shake Learning Resource Center. So let's give her a round of applause, her and her team really quick.
Can you hear me? Okay. I do want to thank you all very much for attending today. This has been a great deal of work and effort, and I'm so excited to just have Trent here for his presentation. And I hope that if you haven't already seen the exhibit, that you go over there. I think you'll find it very impactful. And if there's any questions or anything that I can do for any of you, I'm sitting right over here. So, and I'll be here for most of the day. There's a second presentation, same thing at 1 o'clock. So.
All right, one more time for Charla. Okay, and this was all put together by Charla and her team through a grant with the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum and the American Library Association. So we're very happy that this has all worked out for us. Okay, and now I am going to turn the time over to Trent Andrews.
Hello, can everybody hear me? Thank you all for being here today. I'd like to thank Vincennes University and the Shake Library for inviting me here to tell Eva Kor's story. My name is Trent Andrews. I'm the operations director at the Holocaust Museum in Terre Haute, Indiana. We tell the story of Eva Kor and other Holocaust survivors that lived in the Terre Haute community to teach about the Holocaust. Eva Kor was a survivor of Auschwitz. Her husband, Michael Kor, was a survivor of slave labor in Buchenwald. And Walter Sommers grew up in Nazi-occupied Germany, and his family ended up fleeing after the events of Kristallnacht. We are open for private tours for schools, and we see around 8,000 students per year, 10,000 to 12,000 visitors per year coming to the museum for tours of the Holocaust and the survivors' experiences. First, I'd like for you guys to watch this introductory film about Eva Kor. It's going to give you a very basic overview of her experiences during the Holocaust, and then I'll go back through and give some additional details.
I am at peace with myself. We cannot change what happened, but we can change how we relate to it. was born in a very small village in Transylvania, Romania in 1934. The village had about 100 families, all Christian. We were the only Jewish family. I had two older sisters, Edith and Elise, and my twin sister, Miriam. By May of 1940, Hungary occupied Transylvania, and with the occupation, everything changed. In 1944, we were taken to the ghetto. There was only one building, the commandant's headquarters, so we built our tents out of sheets and blankets. We kept telling ourselves that as long as the family is together, somehow we are going to make it. We were taken out from the ghetto and loaded into cattle cars. The cattle car had about 100 people. We were standing and leaning against each other. There was no place to sit. Between each two cattle cars, there was a booth with a Nazi guard with a gun, and he told us, if anybody will escape, I am going to shoot. Finally, the train stopped. One moment I was in the cattle car, next moment I was standing on a selection platform. Everything was moving very fast. There was not enough time to process what was happening. And I looked around for my father and my two older sisters. I never saw them again. My mother grabbed my twin sister, Miriam, and me by the hand because we were her youngest children. And she hoped that as long as she could hold on to us, that she could protect us. And when the Nazi asked my mother, are they twins, because he noticed us, my mother asked, is that good? And the Nazi said yes, and my mother said yes. At that moment, another Nazi came, pulled my mother to one side, we were pulled to another side, we were crying, she was crying. I never even said goodbye to her. In the barrack, we were little girls from age 2 to age 16. By 8 o'clock every morning, we were back at our barrack for Dr. Mengele's daily inspection. Mengele had a nickname. He was called the Angel of Death. We were guinea pigs, and the experiments were terrible. I became very ill with a very high fever. Next morning, Dr. Mengele came in with 4 doctors. He looked at my fever chart, laughing sarcastically. He said, too bad, she's so young. She has only 2 weeks to live. I made a silent pledge that I will prove Mengele wrong. I will survive and be reunited with my sister. Me worrying about Miriam and Miriam worrying about me kept that very important link touching a human being alive. After the Russian army liberated the camp, They marched us between the barbed wires and took pictures of us with movie cameras. Miriam and I were 11 years old, and we survived hell on earth. We arrived home in October of 1945. In my childish mind, I thought that if Miriam and I survived with the two youngest ones, somebody else from the family should have survived. My sister Miriam and I were the only ones left. I like the acronym because we use candles to illuminate, and I wanted to illuminate this dark chapter of the Holocaust. I hope when the people leave Candles Museum, they have hope in their heart.
Eva Mozes Kor was born in Ports, Romania in 1934. This was in the Transylvania region of Romania. It was on the northwestern portion of Romania, bordering the country of Hungary. Eva's family consisted of her father, Alexander, mother, Jaffa, Ida Elise, and her sister, Miriam. You'll see photos of them here in just a moment. Eva's family, these 6 people were the only Jewish family in the village. At one time, the Moses family had about 13 members living in the village. That would be Eva's father's brothers and their families as well. But over time, Alexander had actually purchased the farms that they were operating. They wanted to live different lives in a different city. So he purchased their farms and expanded his own farm. Eva's father, Alexander, who you can see here, I was clicking the wrong thing. Eva's father, Alexander, who you can see here, was a landowner who had about 1,000 acres of property in Ports, Romania. He was the main employer in this village. Most of the men worked on the farm. Most of the women worked in goods productions with Eva's mother. You can see Eva's mother there. The 2 girls on the left is Ida and Elise. Eva and Miriam are the babies you see on the right. Eva's mother would always dress the twins, Eva and Miriam, would always dress them the same. The village of Ports, Romania only had about 300 people living in it. You can see the village there. That's a modern photo of the village, but to Eva's account, it looks very similar today as it did in the 1930s. Eva and her sisters lived a happy life on the farm where they helped out with chores. Eva particularly remembers collecting eggs, helping with the chickens, and helping create cottage cheese out of sheep's milk. It was in 1940 when the Hungarian government allied with the Nazis in Germany, and part of this partnership included the country of Hungary to occupy the village of Ports, Romania. They actually had annexed Transylvania, Romania, were claiming the territory for their own, and In doing this, following Nazi policies, the Hungarian Nazis occupying Eva's village and this region of Romania were responsible for rounding up around 400,000 Jewish people that were living in Hungary and the newly annexed portions of Romania. Eva's father and brother Alexander, or Eva's father Alexander and his brother actually traveled to Palestine seeking a new home. They went to Palestine to see if it would be a realistic life for them to escape the Nazi control in Europe. Eva's uncle Aaron decided to settle in Palestine. He moved from Romania to Palestine to escape Nazism. But Eva's father Alexander decided to stay. Eva's mother Jaffa didn't want to leave her family behind who were living in Romania. They didn't have the means to leave the country like Eva's father and mother did. So they decided to stay in Ports Romania. And they lived under occupation for about the next 4 years. It was in the March of 1944 when Eva and Miriam, they were about 10 years old. The Hungarian police authorities were stationed in the village. They were rounding up Jews in nearby cities, nearby towns, and that included the Mozes family in Ports Romania, the one Jewish family in this village in the middle of nowhere. Hungarian authorities came in, loaded them onto a cart, and sent them out of town towards the nearby city of Shimleu Silvanie, where the local synagogue was located. All of the villagers in this village worked for Alexander Mozes and the Mozes family. The farm provided a livelihood for everybody in that village. And yet when the family was being taken away, none of the villagers offered to help or tried to stop the Mozes family from being taken away. If they would have assisted, they could have been possibly persecuted as aiding in the hiding of a Jewish family or something like that. So the choice they had to make there was probably very difficult. The family was sent to what was called the Chehi Ghetto. It was a former brick factory in the town of Shimleu Silvanie. They were around 8,500 other Jewish people that were living on the grounds of this former brick factory. And they were in this ghetto from March until about May of 1944. In May or early June of 1944, all 8,000 inhabitants of the Chehi Ghetto were loaded onto cattle cars. They were told that they were going to be transported to labor camps in Hungary that would have been taking them west into Hungarian territory. Instead, they were transported north to Auschwitz, Poland, where the Auschwitz death camp was located. They were in the car for about 4 days. 4 days journey from Romania to southwestern Poland to the Auschwitz camp complex. During this time, the people in the cattle cars were not offered any food or water. The people in the cattle cars, the prisoners, had to trade gold watches and valuables that they had in their possession in exchange for water. It was also through this exchange of goods and water that the people in the cattle car were able to identify where they were being taken as they heard the languages changing from Hungarian to Romanian to some Polish to then German. And when they started hearing German, they knew that they had been transported to German-occupied territories. You'll see a video here of Eva discussing her arrival at Auschwitz.
We got down from the cattle car. People were selected to live or to die. People crying, pushing, shoving, dogs barking, trying to make some sense of that place. And I actually turned around in trying to figure out what is that place. Never seen a place like that before. And as I turned around, I realized that my father and my 2 older sisters were gone. Never saw them again. We were holding on to mother for dear life. A Nazi was running in the middle of that selection platform, yelling in German, "Twins, twins." He noticed us and demanded to know if we were twins. And my mother asked, "Is that good?" And the Nazi said yes. My mother said yes. At that moment, another Nazi came, pulled my mother to the right, we were pulled to the left, we were crying, she was crying. And all I ever remember is seeing my mother's arms stretched out in despair as she was pulled away. I never even said goodbye to her, but I did not understand that this would be the last time that we would see her. And all that took 30 minutes from the time we got down from the cattle car and my whole family was gone. Only Miriam and I were left holding hands and crying.
After only being in the camp for 30 minutes, Eva realizes that she has lost track of her mother, father, and 2 older sisters. We discovered later that the family had been taken directly to the gas chambers with around 7,800 other Jews that had arrived on that one transport. They arrived in the Auschwitz concentration camp, which was one of 3 camps as part of the Auschwitz camp complex. Auschwitz II-Birkenau, where the Mozes family arrived, was designed specifically to eliminate as many Jewish people as possible. The camp was designed for its efficiency, and it was actually constructed using slave labor from the Auschwitz I camp complex. So Auschwitz had 3 main camp complexes, 1, 2, and 3, and it had over 40 sub-camps, which were used as slave labor complexes. Here you can see Auschwitz I. This camp already existed. It wasn't a concentration camp, but it was a Polish military barracks. When the Nazis had defeated the Polish army and occupied Auschwitz in Poland, they occupied this area and had converted it into a prison camp for prisoners of war from the Polish army. It was later used to house political prisoners transported from occupied German territories. It was the Polish prisoners of war and political prisoners that were used as slave laborers to construct the Auschwitz II-Birkenau complex, the extermination center. It had 4 gas chambers within it, and each gas chamber could hold over 1,000 people. You can see the scale of Auschwitz-Birkenau here in the photo on the right. The camp could hold about 110,000 prisoners at one time, and at its max capacity, there was 150,000 prisoners documented being within this camp complex. Each one of those barracks that you see in the photo would have 3-story high bunk beds. Each bunk bed would house 5 to 6 prisoners, 18 people per set of beds. And there could be between 30 and 40 sets of bunk beds in each one of those barracks. Eva and Miriam were chosen on the selection platform to be involved in medical experiments that were going to be performed by Dr. Joseph Mengele. He was using Mengele twins to test experimental medications. Twins under the age of 16 would be involved in medical drug trials where the twins would be introduced to some disease, and then Mengele would use experimental drugs to try to cure those diseases. Here's Eva commenting on those medical experiments and the Mengele twins.
We were Mengele twins, which we found out later on what that meant. Mengele would count us every morning, and he wanted to know how many guinea pigs he had this day. I was used in 2 types of experiments. Monday, Wednesday, Friday, they would put me naked in a room with my twin sister and many other twins up to 8 hours a day. They would measure every part of my body, compare it to my twin sister, and then compare it to chart. On alternate days, Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday, they would take us to a blood lab. They would tie both of my arms to restrict the blood flow, take a lot of blood from my left arm, and give me a minimum of 5 injections in the right arm. The content of those injections, we didn't know then, nor do we know today. After one of those injections, I became very ill with a very high fever. My legs and arms were swollen and very painful. I was trembling as the August sun was burning my skin, and I had huge red spots covering my body. The next visit to the blood lab, they didn't tie my arms. Instead of that, measure my fever. And I was immediately taken to the hospital. The hospital was another barrack, but it was filled with people who looked to me more dead than alive. Next morning, Mengele came in with 4 other doctors, never ever examined me. He looked at my fever chart, and then he declared, "Too bad, she's so young. She has only 2 weeks to live." For the following 2 weeks, I have only one clear memory: crawling on the barrack floor because I no longer could walk, and crawling to reach a faucet with water at the other end of the barrack. And as I was crawling, I would fade out in and out of consciousness, telling myself, I must survive, I must survive. After 2 weeks, my fever broke, and I felt immediately a lot stronger. It took me another 3 weeks before my fever chart showed normal. Miriam, when I got back, she was sitting on the bed, staring into space. When I asked her what happened to you, she said, I cannot talk about it. I will not talk about it. And we didn't talk about Auschwitz until 1985.
Eva and Miriam were 2 of approximately 3,000 twins that were experimented on in Auschwitz by Dr. Joseph Mengele. Of these 3,000 twins that were experimented on, there were only around 200 that had survived to liberation. Other subjects that Mengele was studying included dwarves, gypsies, and people with physical abnormalities. He wanted to figure out how people born with physical disabilities were created, and could those genetics be controlled to either create or prevent desirable and undesirable effects. So he did a lot of experiments regarding DNA testing as well, but the main portion of his work was doing medical drug trials. There were pharmaceutical companies in Germany that would contract Mengele to test out their new drugs, and he had an endless supply of test subjects coming into the camp complex. He would use twins so that he could have one as a control and one as the subject. In many cases, Eva was the subject, the one being experimented on. Miriam would act as the control. Eva was involved in 3 experiments that we know for sure are on paper. Not many records survived from Dr. Mengele's lab, but we know Eva was involved in a scarlet fever experiment. Miriam was as well. Eva was involved in a syphilis experiment and a tuberculosis experiment. Eva actually left Auschwitz with latent tuberculosis in her left lung and carried that disease with her for the rest of her life. Miriam was involved in some unknown experiment that actually stunted the growth of her kidneys, and as she grew into adulthood, her kidneys never grew past the size of a 10-year-old child. This became a problem later in life as her kidneys started to fail, and she had a kidney transplant, but her body had rejected that kidney transplant, formed cancerous polyps, and she ended up dying of cancer. That instance of Miriam contracting or figuring out that she had this kidney disease is what stemmed Eva and Miriam to create the Candles organization and start trying to find the records from Dr. Mengele's labs. So Eva and Miriam were experimented on for about 7 of the 9 months that they were in Auschwitz until January. It was actually in November when the experiment stopped. The Russian army had been approaching the camp. Eva could hear battlefield in the background. She could hear bombs going off and guns being fired, and every day it seemed to get closer and closer to the camp. The prisoners in the camp knew that liberation was coming, and the Germans did too. The Nazis started evacuating personnel, important personnel, in November of 1944. And by December of 1944, the camp was left with just bare-bones staff and around 60,000 prisoners of that 110,000 prisoner capacity. So it was just over half capacity in December of 44, and then come middle of January 1945, the Russian army had advanced so close to the camp that the Nazis needed to remove all assets from Auschwitz. The collapse of the Auschwitz camp complex was inevitable. The Russian army was not going to be stopped by the Germans that were there, so they evacuated Auschwitz in the middle of January, and they took around 60,000 slave laborers with them to be redistributed into other camps. The Nazis left behind people that were deemed undesirable for slave labor. That included women, children, and sick people. Women and children included Eva and Miriam and the twins that were being experimented on. They were left behind in the camp with around 3,000 other inmates that were deemed unfit for slave labor. So when the Russians arrived at the camp in January of 1945, Eva, Miriam, and around 3,000 other people were left locked in the camp by the Russian army, or by the German army, as they had escaped Auschwitz. Here you can see a picture of Eva and Miriam at liberation. I'll actually go back one photo here. Eva and Miriam at liberation, the two girls you see in the very front of the photo here. Eva on the left, Miriam on the right with the jacket unbuttoned. They were in the front of the line in the liberation film that was created by the liberating Russian army. Here's Eva and Miriam returning to Auschwitz, recreating that liberation that they had experienced, I think it was 40 years before. This was in 1985 when this photo was taken. And that photo of Eva and Miriam at liberation is actually displayed in the Auschwitz Museum at the Auschwitz complex. You can go and tour the place. You can see a photo of Eva here on the right pointing at herself in the Auschwitz Museum in Poland. Eva and Miriam were free from Auschwitz, but they were 11 years old at this point. They just turned 11 years old. And as 11-year-olds, they didn't know how to go from ports from Auschwitz in Poland all the way to Ports, Romania. They knew they were on a train car for 4 days when they were sent there, and they knew that's what it would take to get back home at least. Eva and Miriam had no parents or guardians to take care of them. So as the Russian army was establishing displaced persons camps throughout Europe, newly liberated Europe, they actually had assigned Eva and Miriam to live in a nearby orphanage. So at 11 years old, Eva and Miriam were adopted into a Catholic orphanage. The orphanage had promised the Jewish children that were being adopted there that they would find them safe passage to Palestine. Eva did not want to go to Palestine. She knew she had an uncle living in Palestine, but she still held on to hope that her family would be waiting for her back at home. So she and Miriam started working on a way to get back home. One of those displaced persons camps that the Russians had established was right outside of the orphanage. And it just so happens that a woman who lived in a nearby village to Ports, Romania, was a friend of Eva's mother, was living in that displaced persons camp right outside of the orphanage. Eva and Miriam recognized her and asked her to come and please adopt them as their aunt, remove them from the orphanage, and she could travel with this woman named Mrs. Chengri from Poland back to Romania. They were going to be going to a very similar location. In fact, Ports was just the next train stop down the line. So Mrs. Chengri did just that. She adopted Eva and Miriam and transported them back to Ports, Romania. That journey took another 9 months after Eva was liberated from the camp. So she spent about 9 months in Auschwitz and then another 9 months traveling back home from the orphanage to her village. When Mrs. Chengri arrived at her home in Shimleyu-Sylvaniye, she knew that Ports was just the next train stop over, so she put Eva and Miriam on a train by themselves to go to the next village. So Eva and Miriam arrived home at their village of Ports, Romania alone, and their house was about a quarter of a mile from the train station. Eva and Miriam jumped off the train, sprinted to their farmhouse, only to find that the home had been ransacked, it had been looted and abandoned. There was no sign of anybody living there. They waited around for about a day and realized that nobody was going to be returning home. And so when Eva arrived home to her village of Ports, Romania, found that her farmhouse had been neglected and no one was living there, that's when she knew that her family wasn't coming back. Remember, that's 9 months after she had been liberated. The adults, mom and dad, and the 2 older sisters would have had 9 months to get back home, and they hadn't arrived at that time. Luckily, one of Eva's cousins had survived. His name was Shmuel. He saw Eva and Miriam's names on a displaced persons camp list of displaced persons and saw that they were traveling back to Ports, Romania. So he went to Ports, Romania to tell them they had one aunt that had survived the war named Aunt Irene, and she was living in Cluj, Romania. Aunt Irena had lost her husband and her son to the Holocaust. She was the only surviving adult family member left in the Mozes family. So she adopted Eva and Miriam, where they lived in Cluj, Romania, for the next 5 years. They attended high school in Cluj, Romania. And at the age of 16, they had applied for visas to travel to Israel. At the age of 16, they had not yet graduated high school in Cluj, Romania, but their opportunity to go to Israel, they couldn't pass that up, so they left high school in Romania, went to Israel, where they lived in another orphanage for the next 2 years. This was an agricultural school that taught them life skills and how to be productive members of society. Eva actually, in Israel, wasn't able to get her high school degree because she couldn't pass the religious studies courses. Even though Eva grew up as an Orthodox religious Jew in Port Romania in the 1930s, during the events of the Holocaust, she essentially had to throw her religious faith out the window. On the first night she was in the camp, she was offered a piece of bread, but the bread wasn't kosher. She had only eaten a kosher diet, by kosher laws up to that point in her life. So she refused the piece of bread. But she later learned that in Auschwitz, she'll have to get over that and eat any food that's offered to her if she wants to survive. After the war, she never was able to revitalize that sense of faith that she had had previously. When she went to Israel, religious studies it's required to learn the Jewish Bible, and she had no interest in doing that. She felt that God had betrayed her in those moments in Auschwitz. Wasn't able to pass religious studies and never got her high school degree in Israel either. But at the age of 18, Eva and Miriam were drafted into the Israeli army. So Eva was drafted into the army with no degree, but through the Israeli army, she had actually risen through the ranks to become an instructor in a drafting school. This is with no education on paper, but she did have plenty of life experience. She worked with the Israeli military for the next 8 years, rising to the rank of sergeant major until 1960. She met and married an American tourist from Terre Haute, Indiana, named Michael Kor. It turns out that Michael Kor was a Holocaust survivor as well, and the two had connected over the kind of the trauma that they had experienced in their past. So in 1960, Eva and Mickey got married. Eva left Tel Aviv, Israel, and moved to Terre Haute, Indiana, and she described that as being one of the largest culture shocks of her life, and I'm sure it was. They had 2 children together, Alex and Rena, and Eva had a lot of trouble fitting in when she came to Terre Haute. She didn't speak any English. She was only speaking Hebrew and some Hungarian. So when she came to the U.S., she had to learn English. She also wanted to start a career, so wanted to be a realtor. However, to get her realtor's license, she needed a high school diploma or a GED. So it was in 1965 that she finally learned enough English to apply for a GED, pass the test, and then move on to get her realtor's license. So finally, in the 1960s, some time after the Holocaust, she finally was able to complete that education, and she ended up going on to college and attending Indiana State University for 11 years. It was in 1979 that the NBC series called The Holocaust aired, in 1978, and what this did was put the story of the Holocaust into the homes of anybody who had a TV. That was tons of people in the 1970s, right? So a bunch of people saw this video about the Holocaust, and it started getting people talking and asking questions. This actually prompted a local news station to invite Eva to tell her story on the air, give an interview. And from that point on, after giving that interview, Eva started telling her story. She found that talking about her experiences helped kind of overcome the experiences and the trauma that she had in the past, but at the same time, it was forcing her to revisit and relive those memories. So every time she told her story, she felt, seething anger towards the Nazis and what had happened to her. And that anger that Eva was experiencing is something that she carried with her for many, many years when she started telling her story. This is about the same time that Miriam had gotten sick with the kidney issues, and Eva and Miriam started the Candles organization, Children of Auschwitz Nazi Deadly Lab Experiment Survivors. They started the organization as an effort to find other Mengele twins that had survived. They knew there were a handful of twins at Liberation. They had seen them in the Liberation film. The Russians had filmed that. Most of the people in that video were children, and most of those people were survivors of Mengelé's experiments. Eva and Miriam, after starting the organization, took about a year, and they found 122 twins that had survived Auschwitz and were willing to share their stories and willing to help find documents and talk about the experiments. This was to help Miriam discover what had happened to her kidneys, so doctors could hopefully reverse those effects or help find a cure for her kidney problems. If they knew what Mengele had done, maybe they could solve the problem. Here's another video of Eva talking about other twins.
When I asked her what happened to you, she said, I cannot talk about it. I will not talk about it. And we didn't talk about Auschwitz until 1985. When I asked her in 85, Miriam, do you remember? When I was taken to the hospital, she said, yes. I said, what happened to you while I was in the hospital? She said, I was under Nazi doctor supervision 24 hours a day. It was the same 2 weeks that Mengele said I would die. So I said to her, what happened to you after the 2 weeks were up? She said she was taken back to the labs, injected with many injections that made her feel very sick. As we found out years later, when she grew up, got married in Israel, expected her first child, she developed severe kidney infections that did not respond to any antibiotic. Second pregnancy in '63, the infection got so bad that the Israeli doctors studied her, and they found out that Miriam's kidneys never grew larger than the size of a 10-year-old child. So I begged Miriam that not to have any more children, because every pregnancy was a life crisis. But she had a third child, and after the third child was born, her kidneys started to deteriorate, and by 1987, they failed, at which time I donated my left kidney. I had 2 kidneys and 1 sister, so it was an easy choice. But a year later, she developed cancerous polyps in the bladder. The doctors kept asking me to find our Auschwitz files. We never found our files. We never found out what was injected into our bodies. Miriam died June 6, 1993.
The original Candles Holocaust Museum in Terre Haute was opened actually as a memorial to Miriam. Eva opened the museum 2 years after her death in 1995, and the museum did act as a memorial to Miriam. Eva was not able to attend Miriam's funeral. She was once again had another family member taken away from her and was not able to really say goodbye to that person. Miriam was living in Israel at the time of her death, and Eva in Terre Haute wasn't able to make it to Israel before the funeral. So in 1995, Eva opened the museum.
Just to be free from the Nazis, that did not remove the pain they have inflicted upon me. There might be another way that survivors can heal themselves. I have found one way. Forgive your worst enemy. It will heal your soul and it will set you free. I, Eva Mozes Kor, a twin who survived as a child Joseph Mengele's experiment at Auschwitz 50 years ago, hereby give amnesty to all Nazis who participated directly or indirectly in the murder of my family and millions of others.
In 1995, after Eva had established the Holocaust Museum, she was invited to speak at a medical conference in Boston, at Boston College. And for this medical conference, they asked Eva if she could bring a Nazi doctor along or invite a Nazi doctor to have a panel discussion with her, talk about the medical experiments from the side of a victim and then from a side of a perpetrator. And Eva thought this was absolutely crazy. But after thinking about it for some time, she remembered seeing a Nazi doctor who had been acquitted of his crimes in Auschwitz. He had been responsible for saving Jews by falsifying experimentation documents, was forgiven of his crimes, saw his name in a documentary, was able to get his contact information and have communication with him. His name was Dr. Hans Munch. He declined the request to speak at Boston College in regards to the medical experiments, but he did invite Eva to his home where he would be willing to share information about his time in Auschwitz and what he was doing as an SS doctor. Eva traveled to Germany to meet with Dr. Hans Munch, and for the first time, she was treated like a human being by a Nazi. Although she entered that situation absolutely terrified to be standing in front of a former Nazi, he treated her with kindness and respect, and they sat on the porch and talked for over 3 hours. Having this interaction with Eva is when she finally realized that not all Nazis are evil people, not all of the Nazis were perpetrators. And she wanted to make that point clear by offering forgiveness to Dr. Hans Munch, to know that let him know that she did not blame him for anything that had happened to her in her past or her family. However, Eva's forgiveness was very controversial, especially amongst Holocaust survivors, that Eva's willing to forgive people who were potentially involved in the death of her family, the torture of herself and her sister for 7 months. And there's some commentary here on another Mengele twin commenting on Eva's forgiveness.
It's improper. It's improper. I should be permitted. I should be asked. How can you speak in the name of the people who are not alive anymore? I mean, I shiver when I think of it.
Although Eva's forgiveness was very controversial amongst the Jewish community and the survivor community, it's something that initiated Eva's healing. It started to allow her to talk about her experiences from a new viewpoint, talk about her experiences from a less angry viewpoint. She wasn't going to let what had happened in the past dictate how she acted today and how she treated people today. By offering forgiveness to those who had hurt her in the past, she was able to move forward with a new outlook. And that's what turned Eva into a positive, inspirational speaker that many people knew from probably the mid-1990s till her death in the early 2000s. Eva was a much brighter and happier personality, able to talk about her experiences much more openly. And not only that, she became an advocate for forgiveness as a pathway to healing. And that also drew a lot of people in who had suffered trauma, looking for ways to heal from that trauma. And this is what became Eva's main priority in life, was talking about her experiences during the Holocaust, using the Holocaust Museum in Terre Haute as a vessel to teach people about healing, teach people about how to prevent past atrocities that have happened in the past, use her story as a tool to help others. And she did so for about 8 years until 2003, when the original museum that Eva had established was firebombed by an anti-Semitic arsonist. Somebody had vandalized the museum, had burned down the original facility by throwing a Molotov cocktail through the front window. They'd also spray painted "Remember Timothy McVeigh" on the side of the building, the Oklahoma City bomber. Somebody was arrested for the crime of arson, for burning down the museum. However, that person was never convicted of the crime, as there wasn't enough evidence to prove that person did it. Back in those days, Eva was running this operation kind of with herself and a couple of volunteers, and they didn't have the resources to have the security and cameras and stuff like that we do today. They were never able to prove that individual had burned the museum. You can see images of the fire here. It was a complete loss. Everything that Eva had in the museum, aside from a few artifacts that were made of steel, like a helmet and a prisoner's cup from the camp, were destroyed. Any piece of documentation that she had collected on the Mengele twins, the experiments, was all within this museum, and it was all lost in the fire. Luckily, there were some reproductions of those things made before the fire, but a lot of the original documentation that Eva had collected was destroyed. After 2 years, Eva had raised enough funds to establish a new museum. So in 2005, the new Candles Holocaust Museum was established. It was about 3 times bigger than what the previous museum was. The intents of the arsonist had kind of been overcome at that point, and instead of candles being destroyed by this fire, it actually had grown into a much larger organization, a nonprofit organization with huge support from board members and the community. In that 2 years that the museum was out of commission, Eva was able to raise over $500,000 from the community to help rebuild the place. And now what the museum does today is talk about Eva's story, use the power of forgiveness to send people down a pathway of healing, use other survivor stories to talk about the Holocaust. And we're the only museum that's honoring the Mengele twins, the only museum that puts an emphasis on the importance of the children of Auschwitz, the kids that were being experimented on, the kids that were suffering under Nazi imprisonment. We have this amazing program called Dimensions and Testimony that allows you to interact with a Holocaust survivor. Eva Kor, even after she passed away in 2019, her story has been preserved in this interactive program where you can still have a conversation with her through an interview process. If you ask a question, you'll get her most relevant responses back. Real questions and real responses that she had given in previous interviews were saved into a database that you can now access by asking. And I think that this program is being featured in the Shake Library as part of the Americans in the Holocaust exhibit. The program is called Dimensions and Testimony, and if you haven't had a chance to use it, I definitely recommend you do that. The museum is open to the public. Now we're open to the public 3 days a week. And like I mentioned earlier, we see around 10 or 12,000 visitors every year. The museum is fully funded by donations. We have lots of individual funders to help keep the museum going. We have a small staff that works on grant writing to receive grants from the community. But we are fully funded on donations, and people can support the museum not just by giving us donations and supporting our mission that way, but by attending programs. And when we have successful programs, it shows our funders that their money is well invested, and it allows us to be eligible for additional funding. But what I'd like to do now is take some time to...
But what is my forgiveness? I like it. It is an act of self-healing, self-liberation, self-empowerment. All victims, all hurt, feel hopeless, feel helpless, feel powerless. I want everybody to remember that we cannot change what happened. That is the tragic part. But we can change how we relate to it.
We hope that through people visiting Candles Holocaust Museum, you can use Eva's story to not only learn of tragedy, but learn of how to overcome that. And we want people to leave the museum with a positive spirit. We do talk about dark topics, but we think it has a inspirational ending. There's a light at the end of the tunnel, and we want people to leave there knowing that and having some resources available to find that pathway. So what I'd like to do now is take questions. If you guys have specific questions about Eva's experiences during the Holocaust, or you want to know anything about the Holocaust Museum, Candles, we can take audience questions now. I worked with Eva for about 6 years at the museum before she passed away. I traveled to Auschwitz with her 2 times and then once without her being there. I've been back to her village of Ports, Romania, and toured historical sites with her there as well. So I know some of the things that Eva's experienced pretty well. So if you want an insider's look at some of that stuff, I'd be happy to share some stories. And remember, if you have a question, you can approach one of the microphones on either side of the room.
Hello.
Hi.
I was wondering what we have seen in terms of generational trauma.
In terms of generational trauma, this is like the children of Holocaust survivors and how they are experiencing things. What seems to happen is that like Eva and Mickey were both Holocaust survivors. They both lost their families during the Holocaust. And what we're experiencing is this almost like loss of family connection amongst the survivors and the children of survivors. The parents had lost their children. They, in a lot of cases, have a hard time building relationships with their children because they know what had happened to their parents. It's hard for them to become the parents that they had lost. So we see a lot of second-generation survivors who grew up with a very different family than what we are used to. They didn't, like Eva and Mickey, for instance, they didn't have, Alex and Rena had no grandparents, and but the generational trauma is passed down from the survivors to the second gen, and now we're starting to see this come through in third generations who feel a sense of responsibility for telling their family stories. This happens with second generation and third generation, a sense of responsibility, and it's connected to a sense of guilt whenever they aren't actually able to do much and to honor their family's story who have a Holocaust survivor in the past. But it does come connected to a sense of guilt that they feel responsible for doing something to honor the family, doing something to prevent that from happening again. So the ones that we see who are actively participating and sharing their family stories, I think are the ones who are beginning to work through the things that their families, their mothers and fathers and grandfathers had experienced.
Thank you.
So with Eva's passing, does her husband or children come into your guys' museum and share her story?
Yeah, so Eva passed away in 2019. We've been operating for 5.5 years without Eva's presence in the museum now. And Eva's husband passed away in 2021, October of 21, but up to that point, he was as active as he could be with the museum. He did continue to be a part of telling his story up to the time that he died. Eva's children, daughter Rena, she is living on the West Coast and isn't as involved with candles as Alex, but Eva's son Alex is involved with candles. He's telling his mother's story. He's an active board member for the organization. But yes, Alex does take his responsibility in telling his mother's story very seriously, and he actually tours all over the United States to tell Eva's story. And he just came out recently with a new book about his mother and his father and what it was like growing up with survivors as parents. So that may be relevant to the generational trauma question as well, Alex's book.
Okay, thank
Yeah.
you.
Hello.
Outside of this in the museum, how are other ways that you use Eva's mission for forgiveness and her story to, I don't know how to word this, to show it and kind of let it move forward in today? 'Cause that's a hard topic for people.
It is. So we keep Eva's story alive, not just in the museum, but in classrooms, in libraries, and schools. When Eva's documentary, Eva A7063, came out, I think in 2018, there was a grant that had actually provided a copy of that DVD for every school in Indiana, so it got Eva's story into every classroom. Eva's book is on a list of books that can be read for Holocaust education, and we actively have classroom cases of books being shipped to schools in Indiana. So if we can't get people to come to the museum to learn the story, we have avenues for bringing our information and our message to those other organizations. We do classroom talks, we can do Zooms, do online talks, library talks, even lunches. We have members of our community that would be willing to sit down with anybody over a cup of coffee and talk about Eva's experiences or what the museum can do to help move Holocaust education forward.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Any other
Hi.
questions?
Just a quick statement. I've been to the museum. It's wonderful. Thank you for getting it back open. For the holograms, did I understand right that there are other survivors that tell their story?
Yes, that's correct. The Dimensions and Testimony program that we have at Candles is capable of displaying the stories and sharing the stories of 12 different Holocaust survivors. We generally feature Eva because her story is cohesive with the main exhibit, but when we have groups that come in that are interested in hearing another survivor, or maybe they've already interacted with the Eva program, we do have 11 others besides Eva that we can pick from. Each one of them has a unique story. Each one of them can answer over 1,000 questions about their experiences.
Great, thank you. I'm eager to get back, but if you've never made it to Terre Haute, it's worth the trip, guys, to check it out.
Yes, thank you. It's about an hour north, definitely worth it.
Trent, you mentioned a little bit about the employees of the family's reluctance to help out during that time. I know that area, Hungary, Romania, there were a number of Jewish families living in that area. And then after they were liberated by Russia, a lot of Russia overtook parts of those areas. So can you talk a bit about the area at that time and the conflicting feelings there?
Yeah, so we have basically Hungary had annexed this Transylvania region of Romania, and Jewish people had been removed from their homes. Property owners such as Alex had been removed from his home, a 1,000-acre farm. As the Soviet army was liberating Europe of Nazism, they were installing their own governments and had influence in those regions. When landowners such as like Alexander didn't come back to reclaim his property, the Soviet Union would assume control of the property. And those homes and places were being filled with citizens of the Soviet Union. Those farms had to go back into operation. So like in Eva's case, she was at her farm for a couple of days before she went to go live with her aunt. No one ever returned to reclaim that farm, so it was essentially taking control of that. Eva lived under communist rule for 5 years, and she described those conditions as being incredibly harsh, with resources not being available at all, having to stand in bread lines for hours just to get a piece of bread, or spending 18 hours in a line to get a winter jacket. The education system going from, the oppression that she had faced from the Nazis in the 1940s, coming to her village, was almost comparable to what she had been suffering under communist rule in Cluj, Romania. She was being forced to learn a communist education system. The political system was being forced into becoming a supporter of the Communist Party, and it was very difficult for Jewish people to rebuild their livelihoods under the new communist way of living. And then in the late 1940s, when Israel was established, there were a lot of Jewish people living in the Soviet Union that were trying to get out. They wanted to escape to Israel. So then again, you see, after Israel's created, another kind of abandonment of properties and abandonment of territories by Jewish people in Europe. But yeah, essentially after Eva and the Jews of Europe had been freed, most of Eastern Europe went under communist rule, and it was very difficult for them to survive. One of the factors that caused them to want to escape Romania and go to Israel was that there was just no food available. They were always hungry, and they couldn't get enough food that was being supplied by communist authorities, so they had to get out. But it was difficult for them afterwards. Other questions?
Hi, thank you. I have 2 questions, but I'll start with the first one. How did Michael Kor end up in Terre Haute, Indiana?
Yeah, that's a great story. So Mickey Kor, originally from Riga, Latvia. Mickey, his 3 brothers, his mom and dad, lived in an apartment in Riga, Latvia. It came under Nazi occupation. A ghetto was established in Riga, Latvia, and all the Jewish citizens of Latvia were housed in this Jewish ghetto. So Mickey went from having a one-family apartment with 1 family in it to a one-family apartment with 5 families in it. Mickey's father was killed on the first day that the ghetto was established. He had broken one of the new Nazi policies and was essentially used to set an example for Nazi policies, and they'll be taken seriously. So Mickey's father, Shlomo, was killed by the Nazis the first day of the ghetto established. The Riga ghetto was liquidated, meaning all of the Jews were transported elsewhere for slave labor, and the ones that weren't deemed useful were executed. The Riga ghetto underwent a selection in December of 1941. And during that selection, Mickey's mother was selected as not being fit for labor. Mickey and his brothers were chosen to be slave laborers with something like 30,000 other Jewish men and boys. They were taken by boat into northern German-occupied territory to the Stutthof concentration camp. Mickey's mother and around 20,000 other Jewish women and children were not selected to work. They were chosen to die in a mass grave just outside of the Riga ghetto in the Rumbula Forest. This is known as the Rumbula Forest Massacre, if you want to find out more about that. So Mickey and his brothers arrive at the Stutthof camp complex. They're separated there. They lose track of each other. They're sent in different directions to different work details. Mickey goes to Buchenwald, where he works as a slave laborer for 4 years, working in a stone quarry, breaking stones and transporting rocks, working in ammunition factories. After 4 years of slave labor, he's liberated by the US Army. One of those liberators was from Terre Haute, Indiana. That liberator became friends with Mickey after liberation. Mickey worked as a translator because he could speak 3 languages at the time he was liberated. So he worked as a translator for the US Army, became friends with Lieutenant Colonel Andrew Neff from Terre Haute, Indiana, and Andrew Neff is responsible for arranging Mickey's adoption. He was able to bypass the immigration quotas because he was directly adopted into a family. So Andrew Neff arranged his adoption. He was adopted by a Terre Haute family at the age of 17, and he completed his education at Indiana State University, taking night classes. But yeah, ended up staying there ever since. He just lived in Terre Haute forever after that.
You touched on this a little bit, but was Eva able to repair her faith with God before she passed?
So if you were to ask Eva, do you still believe in God? She would say, yes, I do. But it's not the same God that she once believed in as a child. She now has a different perspective on what God is, does believe that there is some higher power and control, but had never rekindled the same relationship that she had previously. It was almost like she was hesitant to commit herself to it, so never really did. Still identified as being Jewish, was still very proud of being a Jewish person, but never was as devoted as she was when she was younger. But she would describe it as viewing God as a different God than when she was a child, but still did believe, yeah.
Thank you.
My second question has to do with the picture of the family.
Yeah.
How did she get access to that picture if they lost everything?
Yeah, so well, I can use this one as an example. This is a photo of the family. You can see this is right before they were taken to Auschwitz. This was probably in the spring of 1944. The Mozes family were relatively wealthy. They had family portraits done. If I can go way back. Oh, sorry, I broke something. They had family portraits done, and Alexander was mailing those photographs to his brother who had immigrated to Palestine. So we have photographs that are in really great condition, and Eva had actually acquired those after she immigrated to Israel. Her uncle Aaron was living there, and he had saved the photographs of the family. He turned them over to Eva and Miriam after they turned 18 in Israel. There are other photos like the one that I had there that was crumpled and destroyed looking. When Eva and Miriam went back to their village and arrived at their home, almost everything had been looted from their house except for the family photographs. So the ones that are all roughed up like this and are kind of broken are photos that Eva and Miriam had collected from the floor of their parents' bedroom whenever they went back home to their village.
Thank you.
Any other questions? The museum, Candles, is always open if you've got, always open for questions. If you guys ever want to know anything about the Holocaust, we're always happy to share as much resources as we have available. Please check out our website, follow us on social media. We have, I think we're active on Facebook and probably Instagram. So connect with us there, learn about what kind of programs we have available. We have something going on at the museum almost every month, whether it be an online Zoom presentation or an in-person educational talk. So thank you everybody for coming and attending the presentation. Thank you to the Shake Library. I think your exhibit is going to be amazing, and wish you the best success in that. All right.
Okay, that's it for now. Thank you, everybody.